welcome and happy St. Catherine's Day to you all. Thank you all for coming, and we'll get started here in just a couple minutes. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Mike Wyrick. I'm the chair of the Phoenix Club. The Phoenix Club is an organization that exists for one reason only, to elect more Democrats in Lynn County, Iowa. Through membership and meeting fees, we raise money, and at the end of each two-year election cycle, we donate that money to a handful of candidates that we think we can push over the top. So we're reworking the organization this year and trying to make it feel more welcoming and inclusive, and we welcome all of our new folks here today. Thank you very much for coming. We appreciate it. Elected officials, I think Molly Donahue is here from the Iowa House. State Senator Liz Mathis. Representative Dave Lopezak. And am I missing anybody? Is there any other elected? I think that's it. So I just want to say thank you to Senator Klobuchar for joining us today. If any of you would like to get more information about the Phoenix Club, the best way to stay on top of what we've got going on is to like us on Facebook. There's also a new website, and you can join and do all your membership stuff through that. This is a very important election cycle. As you know, we're seeing in-state the party in control, the one party that controls everything here right now, is doing some things that we don't like with solar energy, with the judicial system, and we must end this one-party control. We've got to either take the House or the Senate, or both, here in Iowa in 2020. So, I'm going to introduce Senator Klobuchar, who is the senior senator from Minnesota and running for president. Senator Klobuchar has actually spoken to us twice before, so if this were Saturday Night Live, she'd be getting a little blazer. So even though, and I don't know if anybody saw this, this is where if I were really high tech, I'd have a TV screen behind me because I'd love to show the video of her announcement for running for president. Outdoors, below zero, in the snow, like a true Midwesterner. All join me in welcoming Senator Amy Klobuchar.
National holiday for Cedar Rapids with this parade. I'm pretty excited. But I didn't want to come here without talking to all of you. And yes, it is my third visit to the Phoenix Club, and we're pretty excited to be here with all the good work you're doing for Democrats. And I first wanted to thank you so much for electing Abby. I just had a great breakfast with the great Congressman Dave Lopezak. Lots of good advice. And so it was good to see him here. And then, of course, I want to get that outfit, Molly, so thank you for coming, as well as Liz. And then I want to thank as well first of all, Annie McGuire, who many of you know, is helping me out. And Dylan, who's full-time with us. We actually have put together a fantastic team. You know I am your senator next door. I can see Iowa from my porch. And so I'm going to be here a lot. And I think you know that Minnesota and Iowa have a lot of common. We have a lot of fierce independent voters. If you don't believe that about Minnesota, I have 3 words for you. Governor Jesse Ventura. And we also have a lot of relatives on either side of the border that we have in common. But the other thing we have in common are rivers that run through, especially the great river, the Mississippi River. And I announced by that river, if you didn't notice, in a permanent snow globe. One of my favorite things after that, by the way, is I told, I was on the Senate floor, and one of the Republicans, who will go unnamed, which is how I keep passing bills, because I don't name them, came up to me and said, wow, did you really raise $1 million online after you announced? And I said, yes, I did, but half of it came from snow globe manufacturer. And he said, really? I'm like, you are such a Republican. The amazing thing about that with the snow melting on my hair was that I actually I didn't know it was happening. It was the weirdest thing. And when I watched it on the video later, it was like watching yourself grow old in 20 minutes. It was just really something. So I did that, and then I picked that place actually because I wanted to make a point, which is even more resonant after the horrific murders that we saw in New Zealand, is that we have to cross the river of our divides. And there are great divides that are going on right now in this country that are exacerbated by the president, right? And I always believe that we may look different, we may pray different, we may love different, but we all come from a country and live in a country of shared dreams, right? This is something that unites us, and this president keeps trying to divide us. So that is really one of the major reasons that I'm running for this job, because I am someone that has always looked for that common ground, and I believe we need to cross this river of our divides over the sturdy bridge that's our democracy to a higher ground in our politics. The other thing that I wanted to emphasize there, and you know this in Cedar Rapids, was the importance of funding our infrastructure. That bridge fell down because we have not been funding our infrastructure, right? And after that in Minnesota, we put a bunch of state money into infrastructure. And guess what? When we did that, we went up in the CNBC poll and were voted the state that was best to do business in because we invested in infrastructure and we invested in our education system. Something, as you know, your governor here in Iowa is not doing right now. They're going the opposite way. So we invested in that. That helped our state. But the other piece of this that just, for me, was some cataclysmic moment in my political career was when that bridge fell down, and I said a bridge shouldn't fall down in the middle of America. But what happens when it does is you rebuild it. And what happened at that moment was the whole world was riveted on our town. And I literally live 8 blocks from that bridge. It's a bridge that I drive over every single day with our family, with our daughter. And my husband, by the way, John, is here right now. Off-duty firefighter diving in and out, tethered to the side, woman firefighter looking for survivors in those mangled cars and trucks. What they saw was this tasty truck semi-driver that instead of going right into the bridge where he would have, and the bus of those kids, where he would have saved his life, he veered off and then burned to death. Or that school bus that plummeted 30 feet down, hanging precariously by a guardrail, and that school worker, Hernandez, who got every single kid off that bus. That's community, and it's community you see here in Iowa, it's community we see in our state, and it's community that's being fractured every single day by the way that guy acts in the White House. So, well, we can't clap for it. What we can do is clap for someone new in the White House. Like yours, where we believe in grassroots politics. And you all know that I have a little different background than some of the other candidates. My grandpa was an iron ore miner. He worked 15 feet underground in the mines up in Ely, Minnesota. He saved money in a coffee can to send my dad to college. My dad went to a 2-year community college, and then he got his final degree at the University of Minnesota, where he got a journalism degree, and he went from that hardscrabble mining town, served during the Korean War, and then was able to go on with a career in journalism and interview everyone from Chicago Bears coach Mike Ditka. See, I don't always talk about the Vikings. Chicago Bears coach Mike Ditka, to Ronald Reagan, to Ginger Rogers. My mom, she grew up in Milwaukee. They grew up poor. My grandpa would try to make money with a wagon with jelly on the back of it that he got from the pie shop that he worked in. And she ended up getting a teacher's degree and then moving to Minnesota because they had a strong teachers union. And she ended up teaching 2nd grade until she was 70 years old. Oh, wow. And I still today was her birthday. She died a few years ago. And she was going to be named Patricia, and then the nurse that my grandma didn't really like that name. So my grandma named her Rose after my wild Irish rose. That was her name. So she actually, her favorite thing she taught was the monarch butterfly unit. And I never really understood why she always went shopping afterwards in her little monarch butterfly outfit, which featured antennas and featured tights, a monarch butterfly outfit, and a sign that said "To Mexico or Bust." But I found out the day after she died, a family, or a few days after, when we had the visitation, a family came up to me at the visitation. The mom was crying. She had a grown son. I couldn't figure out what was going on. And she said, you know, this is my son. He has severe disabilities. He had your mom in 2nd grade, and his favorite unit was the monarch butterfly unit. And when he graduated, he got a job bagging groceries at that grocery store. And your mom would also always come to that grocery store that day when she had that outfit on, stand in this line, and give him a big hug. So that is teaching. That's my mom, and that's where I come from. So I stand before you today as the granddaughter of an iron ore miner, as the daughter of a teacher and a newspaper man, as the first woman elected to the U.S. Senate from the state of Minnesota. It's the shared dreams that we're talking about here. So I've always been someone that spoke truth to power, that believed that we have to be honest with our constituents. I think because the president has been governing by chaos, we're neglecting to deal with a lot of the challenges before us, right? We aren't doing it. Instead, we're kind of looking down, not looking at each other, and the time has changed. We've got to look up, we've got to look at each other, and that is how not only do we win, that's how we deal with the challenges. And we have huge challenges in front of us. One of them, and by the way, I'm glad that I'm green for St. Patrick's Day, but also green for doing something about climate change. That are coming down. I was just with our governor on Friday in Minnesota as we prepare for what might be another year of historic floods, which will of course start in our state, go down to yours. Yes, it means infrastructure and adapting and being ready to deal with floods in a way that we weren't decades ago, and putting the money into it. That's why I'm so strongly supportive of a major infrastructure effort, which can be funded by repealing the regressive parts of the Republican tax bill. Yeah. They went down on the corporate tax rate. Even if you kept it at 25%, they went down to 21%. Every point is $100 billion. That would buy a lot of roads and bridges and rail and locks and dams for our rivers, right? But that's what they did. Infrastructure is a piece of it. The other thing is, on day one, as your president, I will sign us back into the international climate change. I will bring those rules back. You know, Obama had these clean power rules. They were worked out over years. and they're just on the cutting room floor right now. So that work is done in terms of putting those in place. You don't have to go to the Congress. You can just put them out there. You got to have a comment period, but then you can put them in place. So we've got to do that. We've got to bring back the gas mileage standards, and we've got to meet those goals of keeping our global warming. And this is a lot. This is a lot. 3.6% Fahrenheit. I always like to use Fahrenheit because people can relate to it more. That is actually the international climate change goal, to keep down below that in 100 years. In the greatest nation on earth, we should be able to meet that goal. It's economic. Okay, yeah, it's economic, bad economy if we don't do anything. Homeowners insurance has already gone up 50% across the country in just 10 years. We're going to keep seeing this unless we do something about this. Another challenge, changing workforce, right? More and more jobs coming in where you need technology, science, engineering, math, and we need to adapt to that. You've done some of this in Iowa, but we can do even more. We have too many kids that aren't graduating from high school, and we need to emphasize these 1- and 2-year degrees. My own sister didn't graduate from high school, and she came down. Iowa saved her. She got a job in manufacturing. She was here for a number of years, and she eventually got her GED, and she got a 2-year community college degree in Iowa. She got her confidence to do that, and then she went on to get her 4-year degree, graduated in accounting, and has been gainfully employed ever since, right? That is there are many paths to success in this country. There isn't just one path to success. And I see immigration reform as part of this as well. We need workers in our factories, in our fields. We've got people here that are working in the shadows, right? And I believe comprehensive immigration reform is the answer. Just to give you a sense, the President always talks about it with security. Yes, we want to have security at the border. Not his wall, okay? That's not what we need. But we want security at the border. You know how you pay for that? So it doesn't come out of taxpayers' pocket. You pay for it with comprehensive immigration reform. The Congressional Budget Office score, Dave notes this, on comprehensive reform, the nonpartisan agency, $158 billion in savings on that bill that passed the Senate in 10 years. Because people come out of the shadows and pay their taxes. $158 billion in savings. Think of how that would help with the debt. Think of how that would help our country. I see this as an economic issue. 25% of our U.S. Nobel laureates were born in other countries. Nearly 70 of our Fortune 500 company CEOs, this is a stat from a while back, born in other countries. Immigrants don't diminish America, they are America. Population, the Irish. Another thing with this digital revolution is privacy rules. I have the only major bipartisan bill that basically these social media companies keep telling us, we have your back. They haven't had our back, right? You send emails, what happens? Suddenly ads come up for stuff that you put in the email, right? You do a search, suddenly you're inundated with ads about these searches. Someone told me yesterday they changed their Facebook page to single, and suddenly they got diet ads. Real nice. That is what is happening. See, I picked up some good information in Iowa. That's what's happening right now in this country. And of course, it's much more nefarious when you have Russia trying to invade our election. But by the way, never let anyone call that meddling. That is what I do when I call my daughter on a Saturday night and ask her what she's doing. That is meddling. This was an invasion of our election. So that's why I've got privacy legislation. We've got to do more on the Honest Ads Act that I've introduced, where you have disclaimers and disclosures so people know where these ads are being paid for and what they are. And there's just a whole host of things we can do. Last thing I'll mention in this regard is something really exciting. Antitrust law. All right, so the reason I bring this up is this isn't just about tech, it's also pharma, all of these things have gone wrong. Guess what the first date was? Over 100 years ago, when farmers and workers and everyone started seeing, wait a minute, we're getting ripped off. Rail companies are ripping us off. Seed companies are ripping us off. One state was first to have a comprehensive antitrust law, and it was Iowa. That's right, the Ranger movement started here in Minnesota with people standing up with their pitchfork. It is time to make antitrust law cool again. I have the two major bills on this to make sure that our agencies can take these things on, and also to make sure that we change the standard to fit the times that we are in. And to my Republican colleagues, I say, have you ever heard of Teddy Roosevelt? He was a Republican. He wrote this, okay, in his course, basically, of antitrust and trust busting. Sherman, he was a Republican, the Sherman Act. And it is time that we renew our commitment to enforcing the antitrust laws and saying, no, if you want entrepreneurship like you've got all over Cedar Rapids with small startup businesses, then you can't have big companies dominating every industry in the country. You can't do that. I want to take some questions. Is healthcare? We need universal healthcare in this country. The immediate way to do this is a public option, something Barack Obama wanted to do but couldn't get through the Senate. A public option, either with Medicaid or Medicare, that would bring the prices down for everyone. We need to take on the pharmaceutical prices and bring down the cost of these since I got to the Senate, including the one with the Medicare bill to unleash the power of 43 million seniors to allow them to bring down the prices under Medicare. I've got the bill to bring in less expensive drugs from Canada. I had that with John McCain. Senator Grassley has now stepped in and doing that bill with me. I've got the bill that says stop paying. I know you're surprised over there. I see. He stepped in and he's chair of the Finance Committee, and I welcome support where I can get it. The pay for delay, where Big Pharma is paying off generics to keep their products off the market. This is just a few of the examples of things we have to do. I brought as my guest to the State of the Union, Cindy Smith-Holt. This woman, 26-year-old son, he had to age off her health insurance. He was working as a restaurant manager in the suburbs, and he couldn't afford his insulin, diabetic. $1,200 a month for a simple drug that used to be $17 a vial. He started rationing it, and he did it wrong, and he died. He died. And she sat, his mom in that gallery, and looked down at the president. The president that claims he wants to do something about pharma, but when he proposes his proposal, what happens? The pharma stock goes up. That's what happened. He's done nothing to bring those prices down. Nothing. And so that's why I pledge to you, pharma may think they own Washington with their 2 lobbyists for a member of Congress. They don't own me. To win this election. Number one, we have to make sure our democracy works. I talked about the elections and that getting Russia out of our elections. Okay, but we have to stop these people that are trying to suppress the vote. Yes. I've got the bill to register every eligible voter to vote across the nation when they turn 18. Yes. You should be able to be eligible to vote everywhere in this nation when you turn 18. That's number one. But the second thing that we need to do is to make sure that we win. Yes. Let me tell you how I win. Okay. I'm someone that stood out in the middle of a blizzard at 17 degrees. And I did it for a reason. I wanted to show the nation that I've got grit. I don't come from a lot of money. When I first ran for Senate, no one thought I could win. When I first ran for the county attorney, I was the first woman in both my jobs. No one thought I could win. And when I ran for Senate, I was trying to raise money. I called everyone across the country, and no one could say my name. Now they can. And I ended up giving up 1 month. I'm like, oh man, no one's calling me back. So I went through all my old address books because I'm creative. And I found everyone I ever knew in my life when I called them, and I set what is still an all-time Senate record. I raised $17,000 from ex-boyfriends. It is not an expanding base. So I will do what it takes to win. But look at my track record. Not only only did Vanderbilt just 2 weeks ago, they looked at 15 different metrics, and I was voted as the most effective U.S. Senator for passing bills and getting things done. And I was the only member of the minority party since 1994 that broke into the top 5, and that person was John McCain. All right. Congressional district in Minnesota 3 times in a row, including Michelle Bachmann's. People, when they say there's an urban-rural divide, I will not do it. I go not just where it's comfortable, I go where it's uncomfortable. I visit every single county every year. I meet with Republicans, I meet with independents, I meet with Democrats. I have people yell at me, I have people hug me. I don't care. I think you have to get out there and you have to listen to people. And I'll end with this. I learned this from one really important person, and that was Paul Wellstone. And you all know who Paul Wellstone's best friend was in the U.S. Senate. You're Tom Harkin. Okay, they were best friends. They both had green for their colors. They did so much together because they believed that you're supposed to go to Washington to represent the people that need it the most, right? Paul had ads of little kids trying to write checks, and they couldn't write it on their timesheets. And those were the people that he was going to represent. Well, that last year of his life, I got to campaign with him because I didn't have an opponent in my county attorney race. And I got to see what pain he was in because he had MS and he had told the state. I got to see how hard it was when he came home and he had taken that vote, that brave vote against the war in Iraq. But people believed in him, and he was going to win that race. And that was the year that he sadly died way too early in that plane crash. But what I most remember about the year was not that. It was Paul on the back of that bus in the parade, because he couldn't run back and forth really fast like he did every other year. He could only stand on the back of the bus with Sheila and wave. But this was the incredible secret, is there were so many people running around that bus in these green shirts that he had energized to run for him, that you didn't even realize he wasn't running himself. That's what grassroots politics is about. That's why so many people, so many great presidents have gotten their start in Iowa. Because in Iowa, you can come here even if you're not as famous, right? Even if you're not as well known, even if you don't have enough money, and you can start going around and people meet you. And the real people, instead of just what you see on TV. Join our campaign. We are excited. We're wearing green scarves. We are going to be in the Cedar Rapids campaign in the parade, and this is how we are going to win. So thank you so much. We'd love to have your help. Thanks, everybody. Well, I think you know what's been going on with this administration, with the gag rule and things that they are either trying to do legislatively, which would clearly stop when I come in. And also you've seen what they're trying to do to limit funding for organizations like Planned Parenthood. And it is so easy to make the case for Planned Parenthood because there are so many women and some men that get their health care at Planned Parenthood. You think about everything Planned Parenthood offers with contraception, with services to prevent diseases, to catch diseases. It's phenomenal. Breast cancer screenings, you name it. So that's the case that I would make, that I made my whole career. When I was county attorney, I actually was on one end of this, and that was that we were having violent threats against the clinics in the Twin Cities. So I stood up for Planned Parenthood. And then I got to the Senate, and I'll never forget what we were starting to see with people trying to take women's rights away. And I remember at the time when I was running for Senate, actually, and I was still county attorney, I would go through our metal detector line in the county government center. And one day, this woman who worked there every single day, was kind of a burly sort, she looked at me. There was a big thing going on in the news about contraceptives. She never talked to me about anything. Never talked to me about running for Senate. I never would. I thought that would have been inappropriate, right? But she comes over to me and she goes, "No one's going to take my birth control pills away from me." Yeah. And so what I think you've seen over these last few years is women and men energized like they've never been before because of what this administration is doing. And so I would basically reverse what they put in place that I see as hurting the people of this country. And I would stand up and I would, in the words of one of my mentors, Barbara Mikulski, who every time we had some of these fights, the dean of the women's senators, she's now retired, she would stand up on the couch, she's very short, and she would look at us, which at the time there were only like 15 women senators, and she'd go, "Suit up, square your shoulders, put your lipstick on, and get ready for the revolution." But to think about where we've been, and this is the last thing just to give you hope on the choice front as well as every other, you think of that dark day when Donald Trump came into office and gave that speech, right? The next day, millions of women and people marched peacefully. After that, 6,000 women signed up to run for office, and at least 2 of them are in office right from the state of Iowa. Okay. Then you go forward to day 9, that mean-spirited refugee order that came out from the administration, and people spontaneously showed up at the airports. Who does that on a Saturday night? People did that. Day 100, my favorite march, the March for Science. What do we want? Science. When do we want it? After peer review. You go through the summer where every Democrat stood up, joined by 3 Republicans, to stop the effort to repeal the Affordable Care Act and stop them from kicking people off of their insurance for pre-existing conditions and stop them from saying that being a victim of domestic violence was a pre-existing condition. And you go forward to the fall in that incredible victory for decency and dignity when Doug Jones won in the state of Alabama. That victory was and then you go to the march last spring, the march of those students who didn't just give their marches and didn't just show up, they voted. The March for Sensible Gun Legislation, right? They did that. And you go to this, good, very good. You go to this fall and you think of the elections when you elected Cindy and you elected Abby. That's the arc we're on, this arc of justice. That's the march we're on, and we must never give up until we get to that day of the election in 2020.
So since the trans military ban, there has been a disproportionate amount of hate crimes towards trans members of the community as well as many other LGBTQ+ members of the community. So what would you do to ensure fair rights of those people?
Right. Well, the first thing I would do is, which I've done several times, is make clear that trans people who are patriots have a right to serve in the military. And I think you know that as well. And then we need to, I think with like President Obama, you don't realize what you got till it's gone, right? You go back to decency and standing with people to protect their rights. Minnesota was one of the first states that included trans in their protections from discrimination. I was always proud of that. But we need to do that on the national level, and we need to pass the Equality Act that just got reintroduced, right? I like the way you say that. This year. And I just think there's just been a lot of, as you know, with gay marriage coming in, our state, Iowa beat Minnesota. Iowa has it, Canada has it, come on. And we had this divisive amendment that was going to take away any right for gay marriage. And the Republicans thought they could create a wedge with us on that. It was in 2012. And we fought it back. I was leading our ticket then. Okay, well, President Obama was, but I was. And we ended up, surprisingly, actually, when you looked at the polls, we got Republicans to vote against it and independents and moderate Democrats that might not have normally. We made this huge ad campaign They're talking about you should be able to love who you can, making a libertarian argument, and we beat it back. But here's the coolest part. We motivated so many people to go out vote, and everyone had to take a position on it, that then we flipped the houses, we flipped the governor's office, and guess what? We kept Governor Dayton in power. Guess what? We then became the 12th state to have gay marriage, because they put the bad thing on the ballot, because we beat it back. So I just think it's illustrative of where the public is right now, and they want to stand by your side. So, okay. With the shamrock on his face,
Yes,
kind of a risk for me, calling on him with the dairy shirt.
Yeah, my name's Nick Mayday, and I'm first assistant county attorney, so I'm a prosecutor.
Oh, excellent.
Glad to see you up there. I'm also a father, hence the shamrock comment there.
Okay.
And I'm concerned about gun violence. I see it in the streets of Cedar Rapids here, it happens here in Iowa. We live in a state where now the Republicans in control are trying to take permits away, make permitless carry. Trying to enshrine strict scrutiny into our
Yeah,
Constitution.
there's stuff going on right now, right?
Yeah, it's going on right now. So we need a leader on this issue, on gun violence. If you're our candidate, how are you going to lead on gun violence? Change the conversation so we have a U.S. Senate that at least takes up universal background check? Supported by
I'm ready to
97%
go.
of people?
Okay.
Okay.
So I think you know, having backgrounds in law enforcement, and actually when you come from that place, it's a good place to kind of talk about it with some people. So the way I look at this, first of all, is I always say we have a big hunting state in Minnesota, right? We got a lot of people as part of our quality of life, our life. So I look at every proposal and I say, does this hurt my Uncle Dick in the deer stand? Okay? And universal background checks and a bunch of the sensible gun violence bills that I'm on, they don't do that. They don't hurt my Uncle Dick in his deer stand. All right? And in fact, that's why you see the vast majority of Americans that want to see universal background checks, and why you see many gun owners also favor those safety measures being put in place. So my journey with this started with the when I was prosecutor and I stood with our law enforcement, and honestly we couldn't get anything done out of Washington when it came to that, to some sensible legislation and closing the gun loophole and other things. Then I got to the Senate, and I actually led one of the bills, and leading one of the bills on domestic violence and stalking, which is an outrage with the way the gun laws work on that. So I lead that bill, and I got involved in some of this. Then when Sandy Hook happened, I had those parents in my office the day that we had to tell them that even though we had a background check bill that was proposed by 2 A-rated NRA senators, not me, I'm F-rated, but 2 A-rated ones, which are Toomey and Manchin, that we in the Senate, there were a number of people that didn't have the courage to get that done. And those family members sat in my office, and one of them was a mom of a little boy that was autistic. And she told me the story of the day of the shooting, that little boy, he couldn't talk, and he always would point every morning at the picture of his school aide on the refrigerator, because he loved her so much. Hours later, the mom and dad are in the fire station, waiting for those kids to come in. And pretty soon, when hours had passed, the parents that were left knew that they would never see their babies again. And she sat there sobbing, thinking of her son, but she also knew they'd lost that school teacher, because she knew that teacher would never leave his side. And when they found him shot up dead, that teacher had her arms around that little boy. So you think of the courage of those parents to come into Washington to advocate for something that would save their babies' background checks. That's crazy. Because they knew it would reduce domestic homicides, and they knew it would reduce suicides. Those are 2 really big things that happens when you put good background checks in place. But they were still there because they thought they could save the most lives, and we didn't have the courage to get it done. So since then, what's happened was Parkland, and now we have young people marching. And that, in my mind, resulted in electing some of the people, especially in the suburban districts, that we didn't think we could win. It was an issue in a lot of those races. And the way I look at it, if we could finally pass this now, and we got bested by a bunch of 17-year-olds, so be it, man. And so that is what I think has to happen here. I was invited to the White House and sat across from the president when he had that famous meeting on guns, directly across from him, because of my school safety bill that I passed was $1 billion with Hatch on school safety, and also because of this domestic violence bill. And I watched him, I kept track, I had hashtag 9 times he said he wanted to see universal background check. 9 times. He said, oh yeah, put that in the belt. Right to my face. Then the next day he goes and meets with the NRA, and what happens? Switches, just like everything else, just like the pharmaceutical promises, just like the promises on infrastructure, as we see the floods coming our way. So I'm someone that honest, you may not agree with everything I say, but I'm honest, I tell the truth, and I'm telling you, we will get that universal background check bill done when I'm president. A running mate, this is, music to my ears. Well, I actually have a model for this because I got to work with Walter Mondale, right? And see, he actually transformed the modern vice presidency in that he insisted on having an office in the White House, right? It got too transformed with Vice President Cheney. I just watched that movie. But he transformed the role. So you really want to have someone that could step into your shoes, right? If anything happened. As we know, Senator McCain, you saw the movie about his decision about Sarah Palin. She wasn't exactly his first choice. You see what happens when Americans see, is this really the person that we would want to step into the shoes of the presidency? So I think that's the first thing you want. The second thing is you want to have a working relationship with someone so that they can be someone that helps with some of these really big things. I think that's going to be very important, that you want to have someone that augments your skills, that doesn't have the same skills, and that's someone that can actually help you get an agenda through and work across the country to get things done. So I really see that model in Mondale. And I just add one last story about Mondale. One of the things that I got to do when I've been running for president is go to Plains and meet with Jimmy Carter, who is now 95 years old, okay? And we had sweet tea and pimento cheese sandwiches with him and Rosalind. And he talked about Iowa like you guys couldn't believe, about where he'd stayed and going around there and when no one thought he could win, and how important this was to him as someone that no one thought could do it. And then I told him the story, and this relates to Mondale, of how a few years before I'd been the keynote speaker at the Democratic dinner in Georgia, where I got to, by the way, meet for the first time Stacey Abrams. And I was down there, and I went to the Carter Library, and I was walking around there looking for like a geek Mondale paraphernalia, like, where's Joan's dress? Okay, so I'm going around there, and then I see it, these words on the wall that they put up there, and this is before Trump, and I thought, oh, that's nice, maybe I'll use it in a speech sometime, and I wrote it down. It didn't seem that meaningful, but now it is so meaningful. It was Mondale looking back at their 4 years, which were imperfect, but if you've got to say this about those guys, they told the truth. And the words on the wall said this: we told the truth, we obeyed the law, we kept the peace. And I think that is a minimum that you should expect from any president and vice president. And that is that you try to keep the peace, and that you tell the truth, and you obey the law. And that is what I promise you I will do. Okay, so then maybe the few people that have their hands still up, you can come by and ask your questions. We'll have people here. And so this was so much fun. I wish I could stay another hour, honestly. But the parade beckons. So thank you so much for watching.